The Bishop of Manchester, David Walker, is one of those who signed a letter condemning the government's Rwandan policy, saying that Britain has become more hostile to those who are the world's most vulnerable. And let's talk to him now. Right Reverend David Walker joins me now. Thank you very much for joining us, sir. Why did you sign this letter? Why do you believe these flights shame us as a nation?
Well, I think the first thing to say is this is every single bishop who serves in the House of Lords agreed to sign this letter within a few hours of the text first being circulated. So that in itself is quite unusual, and I hope gives something of a sense of the depth of our concern about this. It's something we've been opposing for some time. I, in fact, in my own name, proposed amendments in the House of Lords only a few weeks ago to try to have this stopped. We were defeated by a very small majority, only 5 votes, when it was actually put to the vote. This is something a lot of people feel is entirely inappropriate for a country like Britain that has a proud heritage over the decades of providing a safe refuge for people who are genuine asylum seekers, genuine refugees.
But what about those on the government side who will say, you know, you're talking this letter about compassion, about fairness and about justice, that there are those who come to this country and apply for asylum through the legal channels and do it that way. These people who are coming in are not doing that. They're circumventing it, which is not fair to those who have gone through the legal system.
Nobody wants people to be arriving in this country in small boats, risking their lives on the open seas. Nobody wants people to be at the risk of human traffickers who exploit them terribly on their way here. But what we have seen over recent years is continuing attempts to shut down the legal and safe routes for people to get to this country. And simply closing down more routes, making the environment more hostile, is not the answer. The answer is for there to be safe ways for people who are, in most cases, those who are coming to the country through these informal methods. When they actually put their case to the test, they are proven to be genuine refugees, to have a real right to the protection that the 1951 Convention affords them. So what we're asking for is proper safe routes to come into the UK, not a continual ratcheting up of more and more hostility.
But what of the government's point that if these flights take off, even if there are a small number of people on board them, it will send a message to both those who would seek to get on the boats and the people smugglers making money from that misery, to discourage them from doing it in this dangerous and illegal way, and would encourage people to do it a legal route?
I mean, even I think the senior permanent secretaries in the Home Office said there's no evidence that that will be the case. And immediately after the policy was announced, I think for a few days there was a suggestion there were fewer people crossing the Channel. Then the weather cleared up and suddenly the numbers were back to what they'd been before. So there's absolutely no evidence to date that this is going to act as a major deterrent on people and putting people's rights at risk in the way that this is happening, rejecting people who have a legitimate claim to asylum, to refugee status. We just don't think is the right way to go about it.
Do you think we as a nation have become perhaps a little bit less tolerant or less compassionate over the last few years? I don't know if it's something linked to COVID or the fact that we were all very much isolated within very small groups. But do you think generally there is less tolerance in community for others, in inverted commas?
No, I wouldn't say that entirely. Look at the way that people have responded to the Ukrainian crisis. There's been an overwhelming welcome for people who've been making their way here from there, in far surpassing, I think, the government's own expectations in that. But I think at times people fear they can be led into fearing that somehow these refugees are going to change our society. We're actually talking about pretty small numbers who end up in the small boats. And the numbers who come, when Britain is not the main destination for refugees in Europe, there are far more refugees in other parts of the European area. And so we have to play our part, take our share of those who are really fleeing war and terror and persecution in their homelands. And I think once it's presented in that way, I think people will support, as they supported the Ukrainians.
You talk about people, perhaps some people being scared, fear, and you raised, of course, the Homes for Ukraine scheme that the government came up with. What do you think about that when you look at that and you contrast the way that those are being welcomed from Ukraine? You mentioned fear. Do you think racism plays a part, that people are more welcoming of those in this country who look more like them?
I think we all have an innate tendency to feel more naturally a kinship with people who look a bit like us and seem to come from a similar background. But actually what enriches our society is its very diversity. I'm fortunate enough to live in an extremely diverse city in Manchester, where generations of people have come here, often as refugees, bringing their talents and their skills, adding to the economy and the value of the community. And so I think once people get to know, as real human beings, those who are coming and fleeing war and famine and terror in other places, I think those attitudes do change. The fear is often fear of the unknown, and as long as we can conquer that, I think people become much more welcoming.
And this, obviously, the idea of these flights is to try and discourage people traffickers. Do you have any thoughts as to how people could be discouraged from making these perilous journeys?
Yes, it's very simple. The way you discourage people from making these perilous journeys is by having safe routes that might begin with an initial claim being very rapidly assessed to see whether it looks to hold water before somebody arrives at the UK, and then having the opportunity people have always historically had in these shores to make their case. If they're proven to be genuine refugees, then to have the rights to stay here and rebuild their lives after the trauma they suffered, in the same way that refugees have been doing for many, many decades. So that's the answer. It's safe routes, it's not no routes.